Everybody that is joining us for this session today. I know it's going to be really exciting because I have been poring over the bios of these really talented humans you see in front of us, and I'm just excited to hear them speak. So, without further ado, I'd like to just go through and start. I want to just sort of introduce you to our panelists today, give you a little bit of background from them. First up, we have Julie M. Sloan. She, before the world shut down, was the production sound mixer for Tina, the Tina Turner musical on Broadway. Previous Broadway musical credits include Ain't Too Proud, SpongeBob SquarePants, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, On Your Feet, Jesus Christ Superstar, the 2012 revival, Guys and Dolls, the 2009 revival, and over 10 years of Jersey Boys. Tours include Hairspray, Jesus Christ Superstar, Aida, and Annie Get Your Gun. She holds a degree in audio technology from the Indiana University School of Music, where she once mixed a tree planting ceremony with the Dalai Lama and monitors for Guar on the same day. I know what my first question is. Um, Next up, we have Heather Augustine. Before also pre-pandemic was touring the U.S. with Broadway-style shows. She graduated from Penn State University with a BFA in Theatrical Design and Technology, with an emphasis on sound design, and has had been on the road for about 7 years. During her touring career, she worked on a variety of shows, including Billy Elliot, Dirty Dancing, Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, and Miss Saigon. She was last the A1 for the first national tour of Mean Girls. And also, we have Becca Stoll. Becca is a theatrical audio engineer. She specializes in mixing musicals and is especially passionate about mixing new works. Pre pandemic, her main gig was head of audio on Rock of Ages, off Broadway at New World Stages. Other New York credits of hers include Two's a Crowd, 59E59, A Strange Loop at Playwrights Horizons, Antigone and Ferguson at St. Anne's Church, and We Are the Tigers at Theater 80. Um, Other tours include Million Dollar Quartet as A2, and selected regional are The Donkey Show at Oberon, Caucasian Chalk Circle as A2 at Yale Rep, 3 seasons as production audio engineer for the Goodspeed Opera House, and her education is from Carnegie Mellon School of Drama and NHSI Theater Cherubs. Also, a question I am going to ask. And she is a member of TSDCA and USITT, and of course, Sound Girls. And may as well introduce myself. My name is Elisabeth Weidner. I am a sound designer and composer. Before being freelance, served as the resident sound designer and director for PCPA, Pacific Conservatory Theater, for about 10 years. I am an adjunct professor at California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, where I teach sound design and engineering for theater. And I sit on the USITT Sound Commission jury for the current practices and research and sound paper submissions. I am also in the TSDCA, where I serve as co-vice chair and am a contributing blogger here at Sound Girls. So, what a mouthful. I just want to dive right in. I've got all of your questions here and should be able to take some questions from the chat. So, without further ado, let's just jump right in. And anyone on the panel, just feel free to sort of answer if you hear a question that jumps out at you. Let's start with an easy one. Um, what has been your favorite show to mix and why? Anyone want to jump in on that one?
I'll go first. So I would say Mean Girls has been a ton of fun because it's a complete change from the other shows that I've done, which have been more classical and things like that. For me, Les Mis by far has been my favorite, just because it's been my favorite show since I was a kid. So that was kind of a full circle moment, and it's just a gorgeous show. So that one has definitely been my favorite.
I would say for me, my previous gig, Rock of Ages, is like my overall favorite. Although you got to find something to love about every show you do, something that really motivates you. But in this case, it was the culmination of a really tough first year, finally freelancing in New York. So it meant a lot to me to land the gig. It was my first time replacing someone on a show. So that comes with its own set of challenges that we can definitely get into. And it's a really, really fun show. It keeps you on your toes the whole time. So I just, felt appropriately challenged, loved the people. I'm not actually like, I definitely wasn't a huge 80s hair metal fan going into it, but now the songs hold a very special place in my heart.
What about
Um,
you, Julie?
I kind of feel like it's whatever show that I'm working on, which I know is a lame answer. But yeah, like you said, there's something to love about every show that you work on. On Your Feet was a blast because we had basically a rock and roll PA, which you don't get in the theater. So it was the type of situation where you get into the finale and you have, the actors are all on handhelds and you've got the full on Meyer line arrays and there's no issues with game before feedback at all. And you can just make it as rocking as you want to make it. And that was amazing.
No
I
issues with game before feedback. That must be nice.
It was great.
Can you tell that I do have those issues on my show?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Every other show I've ever done. Yes.
Um, Becca, I'd love to go back to you and touch on a little bit more of what you were talking about of replacing somebody else on a show. Can you sort of get into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So I've actually only been, a replacement where I have not gone through tech or opened the show, I guess twice now. When they first took a chance at Goodspeed and said, the guy on top he's too bored. He doesn't want to learn to sub the show. Why don't you do it? So I got to come into a show that was already running, which comes with its own set of expectations. Everyone's got a groove, everyone's got relationships, everyone's got special quirks and things they do. And you want to really respect all of that and the pace that's been set. But also, you are your own human and you're often quite different from the human who came before you. So you have to find a really good balance of integrity, but also doing what you need. Like, I know, and there's solid rules too. For example, you don't change the programming. That's considered disrespectful. That's their art. You don't do it. But that's not to say that you're gonna mix the exact same show. You're gonna achieve the mix that's needed and you're gonna get there your way. So I think it's all about figuring out what relationships you need to build. Like specifically on Rock of Ages, when I came in, and this isn't anyone's fault, but I could tell that things had gotten sour between the sound department and the music department. And I said, oh, I know what my very first job is. It is to rebuild this very important bridge because especially on such a musically tight show, it's integral that that person, the music director, and I be on the same page, able to talk to each other, able to share notes. So that was a lot of it. And then just, interpreting someone else's book, figuring out what notes you need. I literally write a glossary in the front of all of my mix scripts that says like, here's what all my symbols mean in case I've been hit by a bus and you're going to try to do the show. So those are some things that come to mind. Anybody else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those are really great points. The collaboration of the whole thing with people that you might not even have encountered yet is a really important part of a long running production. Yeah, Julie or Heather, anything to add on that?
I think Becca really hit on the most important aspect of it, which is developing the relationships, like taking a read of the situation as it exists and then seeing where you need to maybe give some extra attention to relationships that may not be what they could be yet. Um, and I think that also, if you're the engineer that opens a show, you have a tremendous responsibility to make your mix as repeatable as possible. I think the one thing that I have learned in the length of my career is that we are all replaceable in the theater. Every single one of us is replaceable. And you start off in tech, and even your lead, who is a star, has understudies who are, out there in the house doing the choreography. Like, we are replaceable. The last thing in the world they're going to do is give money back because and that goes for our position too. Not every producer sees it that way, but the smart ones do. And so, just like Becca said, I want to make my mix script as clear as possible so that somebody, yes, can come in and read my script and do their best to sight read through the show without it being overly complicated, and they won't give money back. So I guess I'm just agreeing with Becca all over the place. It's my 2 bits. It's very, very hard to come in and take over a show from somebody. I think it's the hardest thing in our line of work.
Yeah, definitely. Really an intimidating process to overcome. Um,
Yeah.
Go
Yeah, the
ahead.
only thing I'd have to add is that typically when you are the one who's taking over for someone is being prepared is essential because unlike when you're starting a show and you're in tech, you typically don't have the benefit of rehearsals. You're usually mixing chunks of the show at a time in front of a live audience, and so you have to walk in with at least a good functioning knowledge of what is happening with the show, and hopefully the person you're replacing is able to give you a good and clear mix script that you can use and something that you can practice off of. But that's one of the biggest things, is being able to just step into it and say, okay, we're going to do this in front of an audience right now. Cool.
Definitely. Any pre-prep you can do. If you're coming onto a show that already exists, get that cast album in your blood, get a script early, get on rehearsal, get on show reports, if you're someone who accesses musically, like I do, get the score. I personally really like to look at the score of every show I do. We could talk more about that as well. But any information you have a lead on, which of course on a new work sometimes you don't. If I'd had to have somebody replace me on most of the other shows I've done, since they've all been new musicals, I'd, have maybe some demos, maybe a show recording, but not a lot to go on. So at least on Rock of Ages, I had that advantage that the show had run on Broadway. I'd seen it on Broadway in high school. There was a lot of material. And I was given what I think now is a very generous 2 weeks of overlap where the guy before me was training me. You're lucky to get that sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Great points, everyone. Let's jump into another question. How long do you feel that a mixer must tour before mixing on Broadway? Anyone have a sense
I'm
of
going
that?
to say that's a question for Julie since she's done both.
I I don't know that there's a straight ahead answer. The road gives you experience that you simply cannot get anywhere else. Um, like I can't stress enough the value of being on the road. Um, but I don't know that there's a straight ahead answer, because one of the things you have to consider, and this is the thing that I was late to the game on, was the parts of my life that are important that are not my career. And for me, it was my health. And I was on the road for like, I guess 5 years. And the first 3 years of that, it was a perfect match for me. And then it started to get very difficult to be healthy on the road. Fill in whatever health is for you. For me, it's that I can't drink, and all of the social interactions with everybody were happening in the bars, and it was just becoming really oppressive, and it was hard for me to find peace of mind with that. But I stayed out for 2 more years because I didn't feel like I had gotten everything out of the road yet that I wanted to get before I came in to New York. You have a lot of extra responsibility on the road that you don't have in New York, meaning setting up the room, making your show fit into a new space every week or whatever your schedule is. All of that. They're just skills that you will not get mixing on Broadway. Mixing on Broadway, you have a whole different set of skills. I think your people skills are more important on Broadway. You get super tapped into the weather in the room. You get really dialed into how, a storm is going to change the humidity at your console, and how when they open up the doors at intermission, how one side of your high end is different from the other side when you come back to start act two, like more subtle things. So I don't know that there's a straight ahead answer for that. But I do want to suggest to people that in addition to the skills you are acquiring on the road, consider the personal aspects of the rest of your life that are not your career when you're deciding whether to keep going on the road or attempt to get off the road.
I mean, I have spent exactly 2 weeks on the road. So I'm not necessarily the one who can speak to this, but I will say that that's sort of knowing the value that you get from working on the road is one of those things I wish I'd known. I decided to take a different route and work in regional theater before making the move to New York. And that provided me a lot of experience. I will definitely echo that: get some experience out of town before you come to New York. You'll come in seasoned, it's more forgiving, you can make more mistakes. And I mean, certainly you can show up in New York at 18 or 22 and succeed. I came to New York at 26 in 2019, having done four-ish years in regional theater. And while I had to start at the bottom, I found that I was able to rise through the ranks much faster. You know, within a year, I was no longer on the crews, I was the head of those crews. And it's because I had a lot of experience from out of town that really, whether it's networking, relationships, all those things. But one really important thing that choosing not to tour meant is that I do not have a union card, and you have to get in the union to be on Broadway, and is a really good way to make inroads there. So I'm still trying to figure out what that path is going to be for me. And like Julie said, you have to think about where you are in your life. You know, if you're young, if you're not tied down with bills or rent or family obligations, touring might be a great thing for you. Now, I recently got married, so I'm thinking I only want to tour if I can go for a few months, or if my husband, who's a musician, can get on the same tour as me. Like, those are the only ways I'd want to go, because those are the choices that I need in life, the way I like it.
Yeah, I would say, for obviously I enjoy touring since I've been doing it for the past 8 years. But there's a lot that it teaches you just about how to deal with different people, because you are dealing with a different crew sometimes every single day, sometimes every single week or every single month. And on top of that, for me, I'm not very much of a gear person. I have to work with gear for a fairly long time before I can kind of understand the ins and outs. And that's been a big benefit of touring, because you're going to go, okay, we're going to go into an 1,800 seat theater and figure out how to make this work. And okay, we're going to go to the Fox in Atlanta and it's going to be 3,000 seats. And you've got to figure out how to put everything together and how to make it work. So that has been very good for me, because I've learned on because every show has had a slightly different system, so you start to learn, like, okay, these speakers do this in this room, these speakers do that, or I cannot turn the arrays that way because they are going to spray sound all over that wall. And so that for me has been very helpful. And I think in terms of progressing, if you want to do a progression from touring to Broadway, it helps as you start to do larger and larger shows, because I having never mixed on Broadway except for a very short stint to learn Mean Girls, I would assume that there's a little bit of stress that comes from the fact that all of your creatives, all of the producers, a lot of them live in New York and can just pop in to visit a show. Whereas on tour, that's a little bit different, where you typically know because company management is planning for a flight and a hotel and all of that stuff. So there are whispers long before anybody gets out there. But at the same time, it's not a static show. So you still have to make sure that in the random event that there is someone that comes, you still have the show up and ready to go. And on the larger shows, you'll have people that come back and visit more often. So I think learning how to deal with that type of, which honestly, Julie, when you were talking about the weather in the room, I thought you were talking far more about personal relationships than actual weather. But yeah, it's if that's a progression that you're doing, going from a smaller tour when you start touring and you're moving around more often, it might be a third or fourth national tour, and moving up to a first national tour when you have everyone in the room for tech and you're starting to learn that, and that might be an easier transition to get to Broadway when you have all those people who are there a little bit more often to check up on things.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the short answer might be no amount of time beyond whatever it takes you to get 150,000% prepared to be on Broadway and have anyone drop in at any time and look
Or
at you.
sometimes just take a leap, see what happens.
Yeah, I would add to that, like, don't necessarily wait until you feel like you're really ready, because I think that people tend to, especially young women, tend to think that they have to have everything planned out and they have to feel perfectly 100% confident before they take a step, and that's absolutely not true. going through this with one of my kids right now. I'm like, you don't have every step planned out. You just take the next step, just the next one. Even if you don't feel ready, just take the step, whatever that is for you.
That's a really good point, Julie. Thank you.
I would say, and sort of it's complementary to that, but also know when you're starting to get a little complacent, a little tired. That might just be your gut telling you. Like, I know I sort of said to myself, all right, I'm gonna, I'd been promoted to mixing at the main stage at good speed. They were running out of money to up my hourly rate. And I said, all right, I'm gonna finish this year. I'm gonna finish strong. And then I don't care if I'm like, I'm so happy I could stay forever. I hate it. I'm gonna go. I could always come back, but I'm gonna go because I really feel it's my time and I feel I can end my time here. I can really tie it up in a bow. And I wound up ending it with this just lovely, lovely production of The Drowsy Chaperone. Could not have had a better show to go out on. And it really was. And people questioned, you're just gonna go to New York, you have nothing lined up. And I said, yeah. And by the time I actually put in my notice, I did have things lined up because I'd been doing my preparation. I'd been networking. People knew I was coming. I also was lucky that Connecticut is pretty close to New York. I actually still live in Connecticut now. So people kept saying, are you here yet? Are you here yet? And I said, I'm finally here. I'm here. It's not a joke this time.
Yeah, you really never know how prepared you actually already are when you're trying to get prepared for something. Cool. Let's. Here's a question from Facebook. What's the major difference between mixing in theater versus corporate or live? And I guess maybe live maybe has to do with concerts, I would assume.
Um, I'll jump in on this real quick because I have done all three. Corporate is the closest to theater, in my opinion, and live, as far as like straight ahead music goes, is its own thing. I think that having done it all, the actual execution of mixing theater is the hardest because you're working with the worst of all possible worlds. And a lot of times when we get people in from other parts of the industry, like rock and roll, like live touring, whatever, and they see what we're dealing with, like, oh, your entire cast goes off stage and they're changing clothes while they're singing and they're moving scenery on and all that, and like they're cringing, but you make the best of that. You don't generally have those types of issues when you're doing basic concert mixing. Everything has its own issues. My experience with corporate is that it's a little boring. It's a lot early, but it is the closest in execution to theater. And that's my 2 bits on that.
I guess I just add that, the elephant in the room is that for those who don't know, theater is mixed line by line, meaning that you are following along in the script and you are turning up mics when people are talking and you are turning them down when people are not talking. So that is its own process that you learn, and that people, like I have a mentor who's really big up in the concert world, and I've been dying to get him to New York to like see one of my shows, and he's just like, I have mixed Pink Floyd middle of a river in Venice, and I am terrified at what you do. It's a totally different beast.
Totally different beast. I just did some corporate work 2 weeks ago for the first time in very many years, and cannot wait for theater to come back. I'll just say that.
But my God, you worked.
I did work. Yes. Thank you, universe, for a little bit of work. It was hard. I was masked the whole time. What is something you wish you studied or knew more about before entering the industry?
Networking. IT and networking, 100%.
I was going to say, did you mean networking or soft networking? Yes.
Yes. Yeah, because everything has to talk to everything else. And there are times where if the switches aren't talking correctly, I can't talk to the amps from front of house to get things to mute and unmute. So I'm sitting there banging my head against an amp most of the time, trying to get things to work when we have 2 hours until I'm supposed to make noise and I cannot mute anything remotely. So IT, networking, that whole thing, very important.
Totally
Uh,
agree. I didn't get Dante certified till this year, and I'm like, what was I waiting for?
I am going to, as with every question, age myself. Um, the the whole digital world was just coming online when I was in school. So IT wasn't a thing when I was in school. But what I will say is that I wish somebody had said to me at that time that it's very unlikely you will do the same thing your entire career. Meaning, I'm going to do live mixing for X number of years, and then at some point I'm going to want to segue out and do something else. And those were not discussions that anybody ever had. You know, the days of people having one job, I mean, we never have one job, but one type of job for their entire lifetime, that's not a thing anymore. We don't do that anymore. You don't, like, you know, put in 40 years at a factory anymore. So I think that I wish that I had known that I may want to shift sideways into something else. And had I had the opportunity to do that, I would have gotten a bachelor's degree. I just have an associate's degree now, but yeah, that's what I would have done. And now networking and IT.
Would you have done a bachelor's degree in, like, full bachelor's degree in what you studied, or do a bachelor's degree in something else on top of your associates?
I mean, it's hard to say what I would have done. I often wish that I had an electrical engineering degree. That's what I wish that I would have done. But at the time in the program that I went to, the way the program was structured, the bachelor's degree was very specifically in classical recording, whereas the associate's degree was not. And it was a 3-year associate's degree. But it was a whole different group of classes that you were taking, and it was more tech heavy to go the associate's route, which is what I wanted to do. So
I wanna echo all the people in the chat who are saying it's not too late. Not just specifically for Julie, but for anyone who's listening to keep learning, to filling gaps. I know one of the things I really pushed myself to do during the pandemic, I, like Heather, do not consider myself a gearhead. You know, it's a means to an end, and it turns out you have to know quite a bit about it. You know, you don't have to be obsessed with it and stay up reading manuals, but you have to know what it's going to do for you and why it's important and why it matters. And I've been trying to do a lot of my homework on that. You know, I haven't dove into Smart yet, but I've done Dante, I've done a lot of webinars, I've finally learned Vectorworks, you know, and that's all stuff that's really been pushing me because I so pigeonholed myself. I was like, there's like the super gearheady guys, and I'm not like that, so I have to be like something else. So I'm gonna be like the right brain, like music, artistic kind of mixer. And you can be both, and you can just be yourself. But don't underestimate the value of learning. Don't be intimidated by stepping outside your comfort zone and learning things, because you're totally capable now.
Absolutely. And, you know, I just would love to add, uh, don't be afraid to learn from people that are still in school because they're closer to school than you are right now. They're the ones that are being taught right now. Part of my sort of previous career was having interns, and I loved getting an influx of interns every summer because I was kind of just like, tell me everything you're learning. Um, we can all learn from each other at all times, and a lot of downtime during the pandemic of mine has certainly been spent on these webinars and things. So I'm with you on that, Becca. Let me get to another question. This is a two-part question. When you worked in lower level theaters, how would you handle a situation in which you weren't getting paid enough? And what technique or method really stepped up your mixing? So I guess really it's just two questions from one person, not necessarily going together. Anyone have a hit on making sure you're getting paid what you're worth?
That is something you almost don't know until you get into your first job and start hearing from other people, because my first tour that I took, they basically told me, okay, so it's your first tour, you're right out of college, we're going to give you contract minimum. And then you got out on the road and everyone's like, oh, I'd never take contract minimum. And you're just in the back corner being like, I'm just not going to say anything and I know better next time. Great. but that's, you almost don't know what you should be getting paid until you actually step into that world and get to talk to other people. So if you know other people who have been doing things that you want to do, talk to them and ask them if you don't mind. Like, do you mind telling me what you got paid? Because I've had friends who, when they graduated from college, started going and it's like, okay, well, this is what I got paid. This is what my friend got paid. Like, these were our starting rates right out of the gate. So this is probably the ballpark that you're looking for. But note to self, don't take contract minimum. So, um, then the second part was about mixing. I forgot already.
Yeah, what technique or method really stepped up your mixing?
For me, it's as soon as I even think I might be going to a different show is listening to anything I can get my hands on to get the show in my head. Is if there's a cast recording, if it's a current show that you could get a board recording from or something like that, and just keep it on repeat. And if you get bored with it, put it on shuffle and continue listening, because getting it in your head is going to be the best thing to actually translate to mixing it when you have a better idea of what the story is and what's going to be coming up next.
Really great advice, Heather. Um, I
I would
also
agree.
just would love to lift up from the chat too. There is an annoying unspoken rule about in this industry where no one talks about what they get paid, and that rule does not need to exist. You are
That's gotta stop.
you are welcome, and should discuss what you get paid.
I
Yeah.
will tell you something that in in my world on Broadway, everybody absolutely does talk about what they're getting paid. And we talk about it ahead of time. When shows are starting to get together, when the production offices are calling people and saying, well, this is what we're paying our heads and this is what we're paying our assistants, we call each other, all the crew, we call each other and we do talk about it, because we have had producers try to, undercut people and do things like that. I think that overall, that's not really happening anymore. But that's what I'm talking about is, a unionized full paint contract, which is not necessarily the same in other venues, and especially not when you're out doing regional theater, obviously. So I don't have a great deal of experience with that. When I look back on my first gigs at regional theaters back in like Arizona, I was happy to get a paycheck at all. Like I really was. And I think that, like you guys said, have the conversations, absolutely have the conversations. But also when you're going into your first jobs, know that you don't know what you don't know yet. And the first job can be, like Heather was saying, like next time I know better. The first job can be a little bit like that because you're feeling stuff out. You don't know what's going on yet, but have the conversations for sure.
I think it also just it starts to teach you what you're worth. Because my first New York
Mhm.
experience was a lot like Heather's first touring experience. So to that question of how you
Mhm.
negotiate for more pay, sometimes that's a sign. In my case, my final hourly rate at Goodspeed in 2018 was $16.32. They had one show that didn't go so well the year before, so all we got was a 2% cost of living. And I said, this is yet another sign that I am outgrowing this job because they have reached the ceiling of what they can pay me. They're not getting new gear. I was mixing large scale Broadway musicals on a Yamaha DM 2000.
Oh God.
I know, right? It's
I'm
still
so
there.
sorry.
But if you really want to learn to program fancy, you will. But that to me was another sign. I was like, okay, as soon as I got to New York, the sort of generally understood crew minimum was 25 an hour. And I was like, this just feels more, even though I now will probably not work for 25 because I've got a year under my belt, I can make 30 as a head. I have an understanding of what I'm worth. And I too, I was thrilled that I got $750 a week on my first show off Broadway, because that was an enormous pay bump above 16.32 an hour. It turns out, like, the guy who hired me said, so it's 750, sorry. And I was like, is that low? Because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I did not
Yeah.
know. And I feel really grateful that the more we talk about this, the more it's out there. That one of the first questions that the A1 I replaced on Rock of Ages asked me is, he said, how much did they offer you? I want to make sure it's the same as what I was getting.
Mhm.
especially given that he was a he and I am a she.
Yeah, really excellent point, Becca, because there's still a big gender parity problem in this industry, very in a very big way. So, um, open discussions about that is super key. Um,
Could I jump in on the end of that question also about the technique that most improved your mixing? I do want to back up what Heather said about listen to the show that you're about to do. Listen, listen, listen. And any time that you might be able to get in front of some faders of any type to get the body memory, the hand memory, the mechanical stuff into it, especially helpful if you have a mixing script, but any of that motion, because once you can get the show into your hands and in your ears, you can get off the script and then you can mix the show like a rock star.
That's also, I realized I didn't really answer the second question, but this is good timing because my next blog post, which comes out next week, is actually all about your pre-show routine and getting into the game. And it includes a finger exercise that I do on the faders before every performance. There's a video of it. It'll be great. But I'd say there's a lot to be said just for knowing what you need to get ready, knowing what you need to improve, and then taking time for yourself, which makes me want to ask Julie a question. Is it true that part of your pre-show thing is listening to Rush? I heard that from someone.
No, it actually changes show by show, and it may not always be the same thing. Honestly, the only show that I ever listened to the same thing before every show in headphones was On Your Feet, and it was because it was a rock and roll PA, and I had to get up to levels that I was just not ready for. And I listened to Rage Against the Machine, cranked the hell up. That's what I listened to on that show. But I do, Rush is my favorite band. I play a lot of Rush, but that's not the only thing I play. I do love for sound check to find out what people in the building like, and I like to take requests that way. That's about building relationships again, crew.
I was gonna say
The crew in general loves Stevie Wonder and the Who. So there you go.
It's a good karma point builder. If it's an actor's first show or last show, I always let them pick the sound check song.
Nice.
Can definitely be everyone's best friend or worst enemy with what you force them to listen to, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I'm very much that I get to listen to whatever I want to when I'm tuning the room, but I will take requests for sound check. But it's funny because at the same time, people will try to guess your mood by what you're playing.
Yes.
And you sit there and it's like, either it was a shuffle button that I hit, or this was somebody else's request. But sure, yeah, I'm the one listening to Motorhead. Sure, yeah, cool, yeah. So you also get brownie points that way, where they're like, wait, you're the one playing this? And you're like, yeah. They're like, okay, cool. And then they move on their day.
The other funny thing is that there's 6 songs that all of the Broadway sound designers use to tune rooms. So I was playing one of them once. It's called The Hunter by Jennifer Warnes. And someone was like, oh, that's Jonathan Deans' song. And I was like, I've worked with his third assist to the left. That's probably how I ended up getting it. So I'll walk through a trade show and someone is playing The Hunter into a speaker. It's just one of those songs.
Yeah, everyone kind of learns a list to choose from, for sure. Awesome. Next up, what opportunities should I seek out if I want to start working in theater audio? Where to begin?
I would say if you're in a city that has a theater that touring shows come to, ask if you can shadow. Ask if they'll even allow you to shadow for a load-in day or something like that, or you could essentially be over hire or something, just to kind of get your feet wet, to see what's happening, to get an up close and personal look. I know I am always happy to have people sit with me. Not so much if they just walk up during pre-show and like, hey, can I come sit with you in 2 minutes? But if that's something that you could talk to the venue or to some of the crew there to just make that a thing of, hey, whenever a show comes through, I'd like to sit. And even just going up to the board during intermission or after the show and saying, hey, can I come back tomorrow or another day and sit with you? That would probably be a really good opportunity to get to see what people are doing, get to kind of take a look at what people are working with and what the different jobs are. Um, and then if there's any theaters around you, just try to go start working with them. Try to start doing shows and building relationships with the community or regional theaters or anything that's around you. And then go from there.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of ways to learn. Heather and I both went to BFA programs, but that's certainly not the only way. In fact, I did not know that I wanted to mix musicals when I entered said BFA. I still wanted to be a stage manager at that point. But, look at internships, but I say that with a grain of salt because do not take an unpaid tip. We are past that. You should be getting paid to learn on the job. You should be getting paid a living wage to learn on the job. And there are theaters that have, internships and apprenticeships and things that are well structured and well paid that will you to get some of that needed experience maybe. And then you decide, I really want to get some hands-on training, or I really just want to do this for work and I want to do something else, or, this was fun, glad I tried it. And reach out to people. Sound Girls has a mentorship program. I'm currently mentoring with a group called Sound Thinking NYC. Ask any of us. Somebody already asked for my email in the chat. If you want to talk to me off list, I'm available. Use your resources. Use the Sound Girls.
Absolutely. Sound Girls is constantly updating a huge pile of resources for, beginning education, continuing education, ways to educate yourself in the pandemic. So this is one good, really great place to find ways to train. Julie, did
I
you
would, yeah, I would add to that. Wherever you are, whatever city you're in, find out about getting on the IATSE overhire list, because most cities do not have membership that can staff all of the calls, and they do use overhire. And when you don't have a card, you can work on the overhire. You're not obviously at the top of anybody's list, but you're going to start to see what shows look like, how shows get put in. Like, there are some common elements to every sound package, whether it's a rock and roll or a speaker or theater, but primarily theater, because the calls for a touring show tend to be very large the first couple of days, which is when they really, really need that. And if you can show up on time and sober, you're going to be ahead of an awful lot of people. And if you cannot piss people off while you're there, you're going to be ahead of even more people. And it sounds, I don't mean to sound contrite, but it's very, very true. And we talk about networking. Every gig that you do leads to the next one, even if it's like one day on an overhire call. You're always meeting people, and you're, discerning where your next steps might go through that. And plus, if you're taking a union call, you're getting paid the right wage, for sure.
That is also true. That is absolutely, if you are anywhere in the world other than where I grew up, where my home local is Local 1, so couldn't do that. Local 1 is Broadway stagehands, for those who don't know. So, there wasn't really a way to make inroads. But
you can still get overhire, but it's a super different, way more complicated, nepotistic type of way to get in there. It's harder. I've
done 6 hours. I cable paged for a Letterman Netflix shoot. It was great. Would do
That's
again.
awesome.
Uncalled since.
Wow. Really cool advice. In sort of that vein, here's a new question. What do you look for in an A2? After having the experience of running shows on deck, how can one expect to start moving forward towards front of house? Anyway, Heather, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. For me, some of the best A2s that I've worked with are people that have completely opposite but complementing strengths to mine. Because since I'm not as much of a technical person, some of my best A2s have been the ones who they really enjoy getting into the nitty gritty of equipment and things like that. And being an A2, a lot of it is being able to think on your feet and to fix problems quickly and to just honestly, they're the PR department the sound of the sound department when they're the ones backstage talking with the rest of the crew and the rest of the actors. And if you don't have someone says, okay, here's a problem, and they sit there and go like, okay, cool, we'll get to it in a bit, that's going to be a completely different dynamic than someone who's like, okay, cool, like, where is it, what is it, can you give me any more details? To transition from being an A2 to being an A1, that something is working on your mixing, because the biggest difference in that transition on tour, usually the A2 mixes a couple shows a week, and the A1 mixes usually about six. But the last show I did as an A2 was Phantom, and we did minimum of 2 week sits, so there was a little bit more flexibility where I could mix 3, maybe 4 shows a week, and that was a good step towards getting me more prepared, because mixing 6 shows a week is a lot, especially when you're only used to mixing 2. So I would say start to focus more on listening, start to focus more on just the mechanics of mixing, and also mixing a consistent show day after day. So that would be the biggest thing if you're trying to transition from being an A2 to an A1.
Awesome. Julie or Becca, what do you have to add?
I have one sort of general rule, which is if working for me is a pass fail test and the only thing you do is learn the names of the band, you will pass. And the reason I say that is because you are the people person when you're the A2. You know, they know me. Obviously, I know the names of everyone in my cast, but I'm not talking to them during the show. My A2 is my boots on the ground who's talking to them. I'll definitely second what Heather said, especially because I came in as a replacement on Rock of Ages. My wonderful, wonderful A2 Matt was the one who loaded the show in. He was a total gearhead. He knows that system way, way better than I ever could. So if he comes to me and says, I think I have an idea to fix that I'm going to say, oh my God, let's go for it. Matt is on it. This is his department. I so appreciate being able to hand stuff like that over to him. And that he can, then give me really detailed explanations when I have to go to company management and ask for the money for the work call. I can say, here's the things that we have tried. Here's all the reasons that we think this will work. Matt put all this together for me. But above all, I really would say someone who understands how to be in a chaotic and tiny backstage, someone who can read the room really quickly. Like, those things are much more important to me than audio skills, because that's the stuff I can't teach you.
Absolutely. Julie, anything to add to that?
I think the only thing I would add is that remember that you're a team and that you have each other's backs. It's most obvious to me that the A2 has the A1's back, because you're totally dependent on them to fix problems that you can't get to, and to tell you of problems that you need to fix, like maybe personality wise or something like that. But it also goes for when you guys swap spots and they're mixing and either you're backstage or you're noting them, you have their back as well. You can observe a change that they're doing in the mix that is going to really affect a performer that that performer is going to complain about because they've already complained to you about it and you've made a change. So you have to have their back in that way too. I always feel like I feel like I can always never repay the A2s that have worked with me before. And I've been an A2 only a few times, and I feel like I don't measure up to the A2s that I've had. But the one thing that I can do is just have their back when they're mixing the show.
For sure. Becca, what do you have?
I guess the last thing that inspired me to add is also just when I was in regional theater, I was a 1 of 1. I didn't have an A2. And my first 2 shows in New York, I also didn't have an A2. So I got very used to having to do it all and be the boots on the ground. And as a result, like, some A1s are less involved backstage. I tend to be pretty involved, and especially on a show like Rock of Ages, that amount of confidence building, because it is a more rocky show. Like, there are actors who lock eyes with me every night and, you know, need that understanding that I'm out there for them. But if that's not you, then your A2 is the one who can come to you. You can be like, can you go in and like don't actually ask them how they're feeling, but just like say like, how are you today? And then they can come back and be like, she's gonna need a little love, you know, or she's having a rough time, or like, you know, she's got a huge audition tomorrow, so she needs to keep some fuel in the tank. You know, they can get you a lot of really good intel, especially if they're good at sort of working with subtlety in that way, you know, like not actually asking them why they're marking that line, but just sort of standing in the corner and then afterwards being like, yeah, they're not off stage singing. They should be, but they're not. Use
So,
your A2 as a spy.
yeah, it's a backstage recon for sure.
Yeah.
Up on the
And I would say just one last thing to add, also going off of what Julie said, is having someone you can trust in an A2 as an A1 is so important. And being an A2, being someone who is proactive and who the A1 can count on, because there's a completely different feeling out at front of house when you're getting ready to throw a fader of a mic that was bad 2 scenes ago. And if you trust the person and you know that they went and got it fixed as soon as possible, you're ready to throw it. There's no thought after you send that radio call back of, hey, go check this mic out. If you don't trust them, you're sitting there going, I hope they got it. I hope they got it. Please did they get it, as you're throwing the fader up.
Or you're screaming into your biscuit, is it ready? Is it ready? I'm gonna do it.
Yeah, so there's a whole different feeling of mixing, and if you have someone that you trust backstage who you know, oh, they were off as soon as I sent that message, then that makes your job that much easier, because you don't have to be kind of hesitant getting ready to throw something and just being like, please, just let it work. Let them get it. That's all I need right now.
Yeah, being able to have the utmost confidence in your entire team is really key for sure. I want to build off of that a little bit, and I'm going to throw it back to Becca, something that you brought up earlier. What is your timeline for learning the line mixing of a show? For example, how long does it take to be confident in your mix for a show?
It totally depends, you know. My second show in New York was 4 characters, pretty easy, not a lot of overlapping dialogue. So, you know, that one I didn't need to do a ton of practicing, picked it up pretty quickly. I also, because I have a background in stage management, I'm really, really religious about my book. And I used to not believe in getting off book on your shows, because I was like, but it's the book, you have to follow the book. And it turns out I actually now really do think that if you can memorize your shows, and you don't really have to work at it, it kind of happens naturally if you're doing it for long enough. So, and you can make clues for yourself. If you do your programming well, then your fingers will just go where they need to. It makes a lot of sense. And I guess the sort of culmination of that is that I was off book at Rock of Ages by my 22nd performance, you know, but that was years in the making. And that does not mean that you have to get there. You know, you can stay on book the entire time. That's totally okay. I just know for me, it works better to have my nose out and to be able to really, really be involved on stage with my actors. So practice makes progress.
That's great. Julie, Heather, what are your thoughts on that?
Line by line as soon as you can possibly do it. And if you can't do it immediately, then at least get as close as you can. So that's if you have to have 2 mics up at a time until you can get the other person's mic out, do it. But when you are learning, especially if you have a lot of prep time, you should be able to walk in and do a show at least mostly line by line. However, if you're just dropped into the middle of it, it might take you a little bit longer, but the answer to that is as soon as humanly possible.
And I vote for getting off the script also. Yeah, some people disagree. I have met people that it doesn't seem to make a difference to them, to their mix, whether they're on or off. But I tend to, I start to hack my script up and I have like clips and flags in it. Like I know that I don't need this chunk anymore, but there's this one really annoying book scene that I have to get to. So I will keep, you know, as we're going through previews, I will keep chunking that down. On a typical show, usually the week after opening, I'm off script. But if I'm taking over for somebody or if I'm learning from somebody else, it's different. But yeah, what you guys said.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and I also want to jump back to a previous conversation that we had about education. Here's a question. Do you recommend an MFA in sound design, or in sound in any way? No?
Not
I
if you already have a BFA.
Not to be a
I would say.
mixer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, unless you're very interested in going into academics, I think it might be beneficial at that point. But yeah, if you're wanting to be a mixer, I would say no.
Right.
And that I know from my personal experience that after doing undergrad, getting a BFA, and doing a year on the road, I've come back and I've worked with people who have had MFAs, and just having that 1 year of experience out in the actual world working on things and touring, I've been explaining things to them and things like that. So it's to get out and start working in theater, you do not need, I don't think you need an MFA. Some people, honestly, they might not even need a bachelor's degree if they have grown up in that world and they know things about that. I personally went into college. I did not even know what an XLR was called, so I 100% needed that time. But it depends on where you come from. But I would say if you just want to start working on shows and doing things, you do not need an MFA. But 100% agree with Julie that if you're going into academics, that would be a good idea.
Right. Absolutely. Becca, what are your thoughts on that? Did you get to hear my question?
No, I had to come back in on my emergency iPad because I knew my laptop was going to give out. Thanks for bearing with me. What was the question?
No worries. The question is, do you recommend an MFA in sound design or in a sound related field?
I would second everyone else. It depends on what you want to do with it. I don't think that it is a stepping stone that would help you become a Broadway mixer any faster. I would say I went to a program that had BFAs and MFAs, and the curriculum was basically the same. And I think that the people who really got the most out of their MFAs were the people who either had not gotten a BFA in the same exact thing, or who had gotten a BFA, then spent a few years out in the world to really solidify, oh, these are the reasons I'm going back. I haven't done it, but I would not recommend going straight from undergrad to grad without spending some time in the world, figuring out why you're going to do it. And of course, if you aspire to teach, you will need an MFA to teach theater at the university level.
Yeah, really good point. Unless you're an adjunct professor like me, I also do not have an MFA and do teach adjunctly at the university level, because I guess my experience is good enough. Um, so here's a sort of switching gears question. Um, how do you start to expand out of your city to do more work in your region? I guess that could open up into how do you get out of just working at the same theater over and over again? If you're doing regional work, how do you get to the other side of the country?
Get on union overhire lists. I really don't know of a different way to do it other than picking yourself up and relocating. But when you're taking calls in whatever area is closest to you, you're going to meet people. You're going to meet people from other places. And if you're polite, interested, and competent, it's going to go a long way, as previously mentioned, on time and sober as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would also say make the most of whatever's available to you. So Goodspeed is in East Haddam, Connecticut, which is in the dead center of the state, but kind of the middle of nowhere. And while I was there, I sent my resume to Hartford Stage more times than I'm sure they cared to get it, but eventually it worked. I also did a show at Yale Rep. Anywhere that I could reasonably drive to, I tried to make inroads at that theater, just that I knew more people. And because Goodspeed's kind of unique in regional theaters in that they do only musicals. and they have a resident sound designer. So while I was meeting a lot of other people from New York, I was not meeting sound designers. Oh, someone in the chat says they talked to Jay Hilton. He's the resident sound designer. He's like one of my favorite people in the world. His wife actually officiated our wedding. She's now the artistic director of the Goodspeed. See, small world, keep your connections. But I would say just, get all kinds of experience, make inroads. And for me, working at places like Yale and Harper Stage meant I was getting to be at least in the room with New York designers who, some of them I now consider my friends. They haven't necessarily been able to hire me, but they know of me, they can recommend me. So do as much as you can with where you're at. And again, my one big regret is, that I didn't, try to get more in with the Hartford and New Haven locals of IATSE sooner. I'm going to try to do that now once there's work.
That's great. That's great advice. Heather, anything to add to that?
No, I would say they pretty much cover it. It's if you're trying to expand out of where you are, start applying, and there's something to be said for just relocating to where you want to be, because theater is one of the very few places where it's sometimes easier to get a job when you don't have a job and someone can say, we need someone today, can you come in 3 hours? Whereas in other jobs, that's not as likely to happen. So being in proximity to where you want to work can be very helpful if you're able and willing to relocate.
Really good point. Absolutely. Here's a fun one.
Can I add one thing to that really quickly?
Oh yeah, please.
I would say that's specifically true of New York. You cannot get work in New York until you are in New York. I was less than 90 minutes from New York. I could not get work in New York until I was in New York. That is one place where you have to get yourself to the market, which might mean, taking a few years, trying to save up. People have recommended, don't go to New York or LA until you have enough saved up to coast for 6 months until your work really starts coming in.
Definitely. I'm still trying to get to New York. I'm in California, so it's a long haul.
You'll make it.
Here's a fun one. Can you recommend a mixer? I'm guessing Becca is not going to say the DM2000.
I've only ever worked with the SD7 on tour, so I'm partial to that, but that's a little bit out of most people's price range if you're looking to buy one. But Digico's got my vote.
Digico is also very much the industry standard for Broadway. So if you can get some time on it, definitely do. Anything, I saw someone say CL5 in the chat, anything in the Yamaha CLQL PM10, any of that you can get your hands on, you'll see a lot of that off Broadway, a lot of that in regional theater. Unfortunately, you'll see a lot of X32s and M32s. So it helps to know it, but it's certainly not my favorite. My favorite console is the Studer Vista 5, but you'll see even less of those. They're really sort of niche. I mean, they are on Broadway. They're fantastic boards, but not as common as the Digicos and the Yamahas.
Absolutely. Julie, what are your thoughts on that? What's your favorite?
The Cadec J type. Yeah, nobody knows what that is. Yeah, I came up analog world and digital board wise, the SD7, Digico SD7 and the SD10 is a very reasonable console too. But yeah, if you're talking about purchasing for a theater, for somebody else, and you don't have $250,000 to shell out on a console, yeah, I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah. And if you're
No, that's true though. The one show I got to mix in college was on a Heritage 1000, and I would still take that Heritage 1000 over like most things I've mixed with since.
Yeah. Sound in general, you get what you pay for, so take that into consideration with what your budget is.
Absolutely. But if this question is, directed towards a regional theater, what console do we need to buy that we're going to have for the next 5 to 10 years? I definitely would echo Becca's sentiment of anything in the CL or QL series, because a lot of people know it and it is affordable-ish.
And it's a little bit modular. You could always, sidecar a QL1 onto a CL5 if you do, 5 plays and 1 musical in a year, and you're not going to rent a console for that musical. That's the other thing, is if you're at these regional theaters that do only 1 musical, quite often a New York team is coming in, and quite often they're just renting another console for it. So you'll want to consider that as well if you are someone with purchasing power.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
Okay, so in the last year, have you been working on online theater? What solutions have you found to the continual changes of moving theater online and of mixing online shows, and what are your recommendations? Anyone doing any online theater?
I'll start this one saying I have not. So
No.
I've been
All right.
pursuing non-theater things, and it's been delightful for the past year.
Yeah. Me too.
Right. I worked for the census. I've tried to, get into the live stream market, but I think a lot of people sort of already have that cornered, and a lot of people are already really good at it. Unfortunately, the thing that we're so good at, the line by line, requires actors and microphones and an audience. So I have not found that our skill is in demand or applicable to these situations, especially because due to latency, even if you're doing a musical, you are in all likelihood going to have pre-recorded your songs. So there's no need for someone to make the pickups.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It might have a place for sound design, composition, but not necessarily sound engineering so much right now. And I don't want any of us to get comfortable in it anyways. Let's just get back to live theater. Um, for individuals interested in the technical side of audio, such as being a system technician, what kind of opportunities exist?
Oh, I was hoping you were going to ask that one from the Zoom chat. So the system tech position in concert audio does not have like a direct correlation in theater, but I would say the closest thing is being what's called a production audio. So that is sort of the person who is in charge of, so the sound designer, on a musical will have chosen the speakers and negotiated with one of the rental shops. If you're doing a show in New York, there are 3 major rental shops, and you will essentially, maybe you will have one that your producers have a relationship with, but you will work with them and you'll bid your show out and see, who's going to give you the cheapest weekly rental on it. And then your production audio is the person who is going to say, all right, how are we going to implement this system? What are we going to load in on the first day? What's the critical path? How long do these cables need to be? And then I don't know how this works in the concert world, but the sound designer will be the one tuning the room. The production audio will certainly be there in a supporting role, setting things up, making sure everything's ready, but that job really is purely technical. There is not artistic. I mean, there's certainly creative aspects to it, like creative problem solving. I really like being a production audio for that reason, because I have to negotiate with departments and say, okay, this ladder is yours for these hours, but can I have the genie? And just find ways to make it all work, because you get in the space, and even though in the draftings it all worked, now this light and this speaker and this pole are all in the same place. So if you have a mind for that sort of stuff, you could definitely have some success as a production audio. That's what I would say.
And I would also say, you mentioned the shops, Becca. So in every major city, and even many minor cities, there are rental houses to do corporate, to do club gigs. Larger sound shops will provide support for larger concerts, things like that. And you can start getting experience working at one of those shops, whether it's a part-time or overhire kind of situation, or whether it's like a salaried position. And I worked at Sunbelt in Phoenix, which is now defunct, and also Mask's Phoenix office, which is also now defunct. But I did a lot of gigs through them, just a ton. And we would go out to Laughlin and Vegas and just all over the place doing all kinds of stuff. And there was always a systems tech position on, whether you're doing a concert or whether you're doing a giant corporate spread at the Bellagio or whatever. And then of course, like you said, production sound for theater. There are a lot of places where if you're more interested in the tech, you can really, there are a lot of jobs in that area, especially if you're veering outside of theater. And then additionally, in theater, I'm finding that a lot of assistant associate designers I would say more associate than assistant, are heavy tech. The past several shows that I've done, that position has been doing an awful lot of that stuff. My last show, Tina, Jason Crystal he's one of the few people that I know that has been doing solid work throughout the pandemic, just because he's a streaming genius. And, he did the Democratic National Convention, stuff like that, the New Year's Eve ball drop. Yeah, so I'm totally rambling now. I'll pass to Heather.
Nope, second everything you guys said, nothing to add.
Yeah, but Julie also makes a good point that especially as we're seeing more, composition on Broadway, a lot of designers who are content first designers, quite often they will have a system heavy assistant because they're like, my thing is writing the music. I really need a lot of backup on what speakers are going to make it sound good, how much they cost, what it's going to take to load them in. That's not to say these people aren't super qualified, but you will often find certain designers, and most designers have a team of associates, who work for them. So like that's a really good way to start. Like become Nevin Steinberg's fifth assistant or fifth associate, because eventually you will be the fourth, and then you'll be the third, and then you'll be the second.
Then you'll be winning Tony Awards on Broadway.
Or at least getting thanked in the speech.
At least getting thanked in a speech, yes. Very cool. Let's stay with the technical theme for a minute here with this question. When you use a lavalier microphone for the soloist or the main character of the play, how far is your receiver from the transmitter of the microphone, and how do you avoid wireless problems since you can't just interrupt to fix your sound issue?
I'm just going to jump on that. The receivers go wherever they fit. The first thing that is fought out in a production meeting is the space. So the receivers go where they're going to fit. The fight that you have in the space is where the antennas go, because you're running remote antennas to the stage from wherever your receivers are. And as far as trying to minimize problems, your first line of defense is a great A2. Your second line of defense is double miking. You double mic the people that never leave the stage, or that leave the stage to change their clothes and go right back on. You double mic basically anybody that you can. And I will just add to it, at the end of our run, before we all shut down, we had the last round of frequency issues. God, it's been so long, I can't remember what exactly it was. I don't know if there was another band of frequencies that the FCC gave away, or if more things went online that they had been on before, but we had a day of just, dear God, RF problems from hell. And there was an RF change in the spectrum that our system, our support, basically, we hadn't found the right solution for it. So we were still kind of hammering that out. We had largely fixed it. But what I mean by that is doing frequency coordination and moving things around so that you don't have intermod in your own stuff. You're not getting hit by the new stuff that's come online. And you still have to coordinate frequencies with the theater that's next door to you and on the other side of you and across the street and next door to them. And every time we have a problem like this, I just sit there and I'm like, it's a freaking miracle that we can get this many frequencies happening in Times Square. Like it really is. But our available bandwidth now, and I promise I'm going to get off my soapbox in just a second, the FCC has given away so much stuff that used to be available to us, and we're squashed. And we are now relying on the manufacturers to come up with solutions for that. Sennheiser had a prototype in place that they had been talking to us about, and then the world shut down. So I guess more will be revealed when we go back online.
Becca and Heather, what do you have to add to that?
Basically that on tour, your racks end up wherever there is space. That could be in a basement, that could be right off stage of the deck. I have been in places where the racks have been in an alcove literally out in the house, and you just put pipe and drape around it. So
Hershey.
there's Yeah. That Cleveland also, yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, you have those, and also on tour you have vastly different theaters where the theater in Vegas, they built it like a fortress. There is no RF getting in or out, so it's great because your RF environment is very controlled, but as soon as somebody walks out with comm, no one's going to hear them. But then also you have Dallas, where at Fair Park, it's just a nightmare. There's 1,000 things going on. You have to talk to the shop 3 million times during load in, and then several times during your run there. So it's a lot of talking with the shop, and if you're not comfortable with frequency coordination, talking to someone who does know what they're doing, and antenna placement is key because racks can end up literally anywhere. Haven't had them in front of house yet. Fingers crossed. That never happens.
I did when I was a one of one, but that's because I was in a booth carved into the architecture of the building. I don't recommend any of those things.
Even better.
I know, right? Oh, the amps were in there with me too. This was the 2K.
Nice quiet environment. That sounds like an ideal place to
It was
mix.
great. It was super great. I think the other thing I'd add is just, make sure you're communicating a lot. I remember when I was at Dallas Theater Center, which is all of the venues in downtown Dallas are on Flora Street. And I was one of two A2s on that show. And occasionally the other A2, Batman, would literally say, hold down the fort. I have to go down the block to the opera and yell at them because they're jumping on our frequencies. So at New World Stages, where my show was, it's 5 different theaters. And there's someone who does not frequency coordination, but keeps track of what gear each show is on and what they're using. The more free speak to we can get, the better. It's really clearing up a lot of things, but
BTRs can go die.
yeah, we still have them on Rock of Ages.
Oh my. Here's another technical question. This is a programming question. What parameters do you often scene safe?
I'm just gonna start because I'm old. I try to make it behave like a CADAC as much as possible. And the thing that was great about the CADAC is that it was a console before it was a computer. And it changed the things that you might want to change. So that's the J type. The earlier versions didn't have that ability, but you want to be able to change your VCA assignment or your DC master assignment now. You want to be able to change possibly where things are routed, what speakers they go to, whether they're hitting monitors or not, whether they're hitting reverb or not. You probably want to leave your EQ alone, except in different situations. And I get into like really passionate discussions with people about this. You probably want to safe out your EQ for the most part, because you get an actor on stage and they're going underwater and they've got a whole scene left before that. You want to be able to change that EQ and have it stay. And they have one scene, but maybe you've got 10 before they leave. You're getting go, 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 go. So if you're making them sound so that you can understand them, but it's not pretty, just to get through the scene, and you have 10 cues to take and your EQ is resetting every time, that's a fail. You want to safe out your gains. You don't want your gains going all over the place. And I think that's about it. From my end of things, I want to have that control that I'm used to off of an analog desk so that I can mix the show and grab the thing and not have the console try to be smart for me. I really don't want it to do that.
Totally agree. Anything that if I'm touching it, it's because I'm, dealing with a light in the moment scenario is basically what I'm thinking. Anything that's in a normal show run, I shouldn't have to touch. Like if I'm only touching it because it's a problem, then that's, what I need to touch. Emergency EQs, swapping to backup mics. Usually you'll do that with some sort of mute group, but if I'm on the backup mic, I do not want it to go back to the primary mic, not until I say so.
Yeah, I would say that anything that's programmed to change per scene should be something that's either for an effect or you need something special, but the majority of things you want them to stay as they are, besides your DCAs, your control groups and that type of thing that the reason you have scenes typically is to have different ones when you need them. But yeah, as much as can stay consistent that you don't have to guess, the better.
Right. Really great. Uh, and we touched on this a little bit, but is there anything else you can dive into on this next question? When on tour, do you have to change your process a lot in order for the mix to sound the same at each stop, or does it stay pretty consistent?
It's every theater is different. You have some where they're fairly consistent, where you've got an orchestra and a big balcony. You have other ones where you've got four balconies and it's kind of more of a European horseshoe type thing. So you develop a process to deal with the changes. You figure out what you need to pay attention to, what you need to work on, and my goal going from theater to theater is to get to the point where you put the faders in the same spot to get whatever sound that you're looking for. So that might be something where you're adjusting levels of the different speaker systems, like the orchestra versus balcony or something like that. But that's because my goal is when the A2 comes out to mix, they should be able to mix a completely similar show to what they've done before, and it should sound very similar. There's some things that you can't control because if you go like the Fox Theater is 3,000 plus seats, so there's gonna be a lot of extra reverb coming at you just from the architecture of the room. I've been in a theater where their box mezzanine level was more like sports stadium box seats where there is actual glass, and you sit there and be like, there's going to be some noise coming back to the stage a little bit later than the actors want to. Without a bulldozer, I cannot solve this. So very sorry. So there are some things that just the room gives you that you have to kind of figure out, okay, this is something we just have to deal with for these 2 weeks, or okay, I can mitigate this by not putting as much reverb into the system. And that's something I might adjust at the console, not the DCAs themselves that you're mixing with, but the rest of the settings, so that when you throw the fader to the place where you're used to, it sounds as close to normal as possible.
Really great. What are your tips here, Becca?
I cannot take this one as I have never mixed on tour.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Yep. Six one-nighters backstage.
Cool.
That's still a lot of one-nighters.
Yeah.
Especially in a row.
I second Heather. You can't underestimate how your room is dictating your show in each stop. Like, it is the main factor, and that's the thing that you're taking in when you're doing speaker placements and angles and all of that stuff. And Heather, what you said about setting it up so that your faders are roughly in the same place as they usually are is, the only way that you can keep a point of reference happening and have a shot at success. And yes.
Awesome. Someone wants to know, at what point are you added to the process? Are you in the rehearsals, the theater company's rehearsals, or when do you step into work?
Freaking wish we were in rehearsals. Mixers in London are in rehearsals with the shows. Really how it should be. I mean, on shows where I have been the original A1, usually I, maybe get a couple run throughs in the room, but mostly I'm also over at load in. That's also something you'll find more common in regional theater, where your labor pool's more limited or your budget's more limited. So you can't pay another person to load in. You need your A1 to be loading in, which is really unfortunate. But, it could be a couple days, it could be a couple weeks. It depends. Like I said before, on Rock of Ages, I got 2 weeks to do what we call cross training. So for Brad to phase out and me to phase in. So by the end of my first week, I had hands-on faders for the audience. And by the end of the second week, I was mixing full performances.
Yeah, I think that the shows that I've done on Broadway proper, it's like you said, we're not in rehearsals. They are in London. So you're doing load in, and then at some point the cast comes over and you tech through the show, and it's usually, our schedule is, I want to say, about 2 weeks of tech, and then you start previews. Previews are where you are rehearsing during the day and putting in changes to the show at night in a performance in front of a paid audience. And so you're doing that every day, and previews typically last from 3 to 6 weeks, depending on the show and what they're trying to do with it. And then theoretically, when you hit opening, the show's frozen and you're not making any more changes with it. But that's kind of the process leading up to opening.
Yeah, for
That's also one of the
tour.
toughest. Oh, you go first. I'll circle
No,
back.
you're fine.
I was going to say one of the other things that can come up in previews is that sometimes you'll have a really big change that you're actually going to work on, but not put into the show yet.
Yep.
So you're like, okay, like we're going to redo the whole beggar scene in Les Mis. It's going to take us 3 days. So you're going to learn the new beggars during the day, mix the old beggars at night. Don't get rid of the old programming. Just don't, as much as you can, just make new scenes. Don't delete your old scenes till you're sure they're dead. Don't throw out your old script pages till you're sure those lines are cut. I don't throw out my old script pages till closing, just in case.
Yeah, and I was gonna say for tour, you usually don't even end up even close to where rehearsals are happening until you're in shop prep if you don't live in New York. So for a lot of shows going on tour, you have 2 to 3 weeks where you're in the shop putting all the gear together, getting in racks, doing all of that. And usually rehearsals are going on at that same time. So if I can get to a rehearsal, I'll usually try to talk to the stage manager and say, when are you having a run? Because I don't particularly want to sit there through 3 hours of scene work for 5 minutes of a show. I want to see as much of the show as I possibly can. And that's when you get an idea of, like, okay, this person is really quiet, or this person sings full out, or this is how these people are interacting. And to a point, you can also get some insight from the director or the choreographer about what they're talking about. Like, okay, we're going through this particular emotional arc. And I personally love listening to directors when they're talking about what they want and what the motivation is, because that also informs you as the mixer when you're sitting there. And especially if it's a show that hasn't been done before and you've got a bunch of people singing at one time, you're like, okay, cool, so we kind of want to pick this person out because this is what the director's trying to hear. This is the flow that we're trying to figure out, so this is the important information. And so you can get a lot of insight into the show or what the director wants just by sitting and listening to what they're doing. But if you're just going to sit there, you might know those 5 minutes of the show that they're going to go over for 3 hours really well, but that doesn't necessarily help you when you have a very finite amount of time to go visit rehearsals or something like that. So touring, I would say that for each show I've maybe gone to one rehearsal or something like that, and that's been when we're not in the shop or in the evening. And then you go to the tech venue and you load it in, and then the actors come in. So the mixer comes in usually when most of the decisions have already been made. There might be some things that you can finagle with the system, and then you get the actors when they're done rehearsing and they move into the theater.
I want to clarify a point that somebody in the chat asked about what the advantages were of being in rehearsal. And in addition to what Heather was just expressing, when we talk about the mixers in London being in rehearsal, what we mean is that they're in rehearsal with the actors mic'd and the soundboard that they're going to be mixing on. So like that specifically that type of being in rehearsal is different than being able to just check out a run through or anything. So the advantage that they have when they're in rehearsal is that they're already mixing the show, at least the microphone part of it. They're working out their programming ahead of time, and then they can basically be off script from the beginning, pretty much. If they're doing 3 weeks of rehearsal with them, they know the show by the time they're going over. But they miss out on the load in, so they don't know their system as well. But it's a whole different setup over there. It's a whole different way of setting shows up than what we do here.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, a really interesting difference because, we're only getting a couple of times in rehearsal. So I'm sitting there with my book and I've just got like 600 different colored Post-its. And I'm like, oh, this is a scene. Oh, this is a scene. This is a scene. This is a scene, Oh, this is going to be some like gnarly harmony stuff. I'm just making every note I can. And then if I'm lucky enough to do a second run through, maybe I bring my practice faders and try to start hypothesizing my choreography or practicing it.
Absolutely. And to lift up this additional question from the chat too, is this a cost issue paying the mixer to be at rehearsals? Um, yeah, and a time issue because sound engineers are dedicated to lots of projects, I feel like. What are your thoughts on that?
Also a rental issue, a gear rental issue, because well, we are seeing it be more common for there to be some type of sound system in rehearsals. There never used to when I started, but there is now. But you don't usually see everybody fully mic'd and a full-on console in there. You know, and that's you it's money. It's a lot of money.
Absolutely. Um, cool. Let's move forward to another question. This is a Broadway specific question. What's your favorite part of mixing Broadway music? What do you find most challenging, and how do you conquer your challenges? So I suppose this is really for everybody because all of these shows have started on Broadway, have started somewhere. Anyone want to jump in on that one? Your favorite part
Sure.
generally of mixing Broadway shows.
For me, I am a theater person first and a sound person second, where I got into theater just because I love theater itself. So for me, it's getting to be a part of the story every single night, every single time you mix it is a lot of fun for me because you're as the mixer, you're in an interesting position where you're still part of the show. You're still mixing, you're still making sure everything gets heard, but you're also out in the audience. So you also kind of get to feed off the reactions that people are having and get to be a part of that more so than the actors who are 10, 15 feet across a pit away from them. So that for me, having that story arc and having that flow, that's probably the most fun for me because I don't think I would enjoy mixing bands or doing corporate as much as I enjoy doing theater just because I love having that story that you get to do.
100% Heather. Becca.
Um, totally agree. I mean, anyone who has come to shadow me on a show knows why they jokingly call it Becca's dance party because I literally dance along the entire time. I mean, I was making a hands video to show in a class where I was guest lecturing, and I kept having to remake it because you couldn't tell. My hands were so shaky. And it's because I was dancing. It's because I have so much fun getting to be involved with music, getting to really be on my toes the whole show, getting to adjust in the moment and make these quick decisions where you just you have to think on your feet. You have to think on your feet so much. You have to roll with the punches. You can't stop and fret about a mistake because you'll make six more. And and especially just Rock of Ages has been my longest run. The last show we did on March 11th was my 175th. So just getting to sit with something and really get to know the cast, like Heather and I have an A2 in common, this terrific human named Dan. And one of the actors
Yes.
came up to me and said, I have a note for Dan. I'm going to need him to like get into it more and like boogie the way you do. And I was like, I will let him know. Like one of my actors also did a like Zoom Squares video of their Act One finale, and one of them was like doing the ography noise in his bedroom. He was like, "Because I know what it means." And I said, "Don't think I didn't see you grab and throw." And he said, "Don't think I don't see you grab and throw every night."
Nice.
So I
Yeah,
just get into it. That's what I love.
absolutely. Uh, Julie, I think this one might be for you. How much actual work does a sound engineer working on Broadway have? Are things like and levels automated and related to time code, or is it all still being done live?
It's all still being done live. Um, the way we're set up, we talk about changing your DC masters and what level your faders at and all that. Nothing happens until you throw a fader, which is what I tell people when they come up to the console. They want to know how much of this are you doing, and the advantage that all of the programming and all of the technology gives you is that it frees you up to still do the thing that you need to do. This part is not automated yet. Um, and then and then when you have problems, then you're doing a lot of work. Sometimes you're trying to think around your programming. It sort of depends on what your problem is, but yeah, I've had a lot of challenges in trying to mix around problems. I think that we all have, and it's one of the things that you don't love, but in the moment, being able to just sort of like calm your mind and take care of the problems that are happening while still throwing your faders, because nothing happens unless you throw the faders.
Right. Absolutely.
There are four people in the show who never stop following the show. Those people are the mixer, the stage manager, the conductor, and the house manager. Those are the four people who get zero break. They have to be reacting and adjusting the entire time. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, really good point.
So I just dropped a link in the chat. This is something that I used for one of the Soundgirls articles that I did on mixing. So it's a overhead shot of someone who's actually mixing a show. So that can give you an idea of the fact that you don't really use mute buttons that much. It's all just faders going up and down and then you taking scenes to switch to the next DCA one. So if anyone wants a little preview of what most mixers do, that's one of those pictures worth 1,000 words on that one.
That's great. Thanks, Heather. That's really awesome. Okay, so I've got about 3 more questions. If you are waiting for your chance to ask something in the chat, now's the time to do it. Because I feel that we're sort of winding down a little bit, but let me get to these couple of last questions. I don't even know who to throw this to, so let me just ask. What is the main difference between mixing for theater versus a feature film, for example? What skills do you need to harness the most? Anyone have some?
No idea.
Right.
Never done film.
Well,
no
you need
idea.
a good ear for both. You need to be creative, but unless you're doing like location or live TV, then post-production is a different ball game. You get to work on it until it's right. I knew that post-production wasn't for me. I dated someone who worked in post-production. I went to visit him when he was working, and I watched him edit a clip of someone saying, "What's a frittata?" for an hour. And I was like, this is not my game. Like, I get that to you, it has genuinely grown better. I'm like, what's the next line? I want to keep moving. So if you really like to finesse and do artistry and prefer your work to be more project-based, you might find a lot of success in film. The other thing about film is that every department is separate. So like in sound, we're mixing everything, but music, dialogue, Foley, effects, those are all different departments and different people in film. So you can really specialize a little more if that's what you want.
Great, that's great. Let's see. This is one that came to us early. Have there been many women that you've come across also working in theater, the theater realm of sound engineering? Julie.
When I started Jersey Boys in New York, which was my first show that I did, I'm the original mixer on Jersey Boys. There were like 6 of us. And now there are far more. Like I know of Heather and Becca and Cassie, who wasn't able to join us, and Maxine, and so many other lovely people that weren't here when I started. And before I ever got here, there were people like Cindy Hawkins and Karen Zabinski that were literally getting thrown off their trucks by the Teamsters because they were chicks. I mean, the women that were here before me paved such a great way for us to get here. And I remember very, very clearly, going into the shop one day in the middle of the Jersey Boys run, maybe like a couple of years into it, something like that. And like I said, about 6 women when I got here. And I looked up and I looked across the shop floor and there were 10 women that I didn't know. And I was like, how amazing is that? Like this has just happened in a few years. So that's my 2 bits on it. I don't know how many women we have now. It's a very, very small part of the industry to begin with. I mean, there are 34 Broadway theaters. So, but within that, there's certainly a lot more of us than there used to be.
I remember thinking this. I remember being across from you at the shop one day and thinking the same thing. I was like, look at us, we're here. Because I used to do it I had a year where I just did a thing where every time I was the only woman on a call, I just tweeted it, without judgment. I just said, today I am loading in at Manhattan Theater Club and I'm the only woman on the call. Today I'm loading in at Playwrights Horizons and I am the only woman on the call. Those are the names of off-Broadway theaters. So I'd say, and I feel the same way that, how Julie feels that, the generation before her paved the way. I feel like the generation of Julie and Kate Portek and Karen Ford have all paved the way for me. And especially that people like Julie and Elizabeth and Anna Lee Craig, who are women and parents on Broadway, because that is something that I also aspire to be. And I know it must not be easy. I know that there's a lot of work to be done, but I think that's sort of our next battle, because I think there are a lot of men who are parents on Broadway, and there are not as many women who are parents who are doing 8 a week. And I would like to see that change, and I'd like to see the industry give them what they need to do the job.
Yeah, for touring, it's same thing where when I started even just 8 years ago, there weren't as many, and now it's become a more common thing where when I walk into a theater, it's not automatically assumed that I'm either the A2 or on wardrobe. And that was something that happened earlier. And granted, for the first couple of years I was on tour, I was the A2, but I have had even as early as a couple years ago for I would walk in and you'd show cards and contracts and the guy would be like, "Oh, are you the assistant?" It's like, "Nope, check the card. It says head." And he'd be like, "Oh, well, my favorite thing was there were a couple theaters that they were like, 'Oh, well, your assistant said that he was the head, so you should talk to him about that.'" It's like, number one, Mark would never do that. That's cute though. Number two, all you had to do was look at his card and you would have seen that he was the assistant. Like, there's okay, cool. Yeah, no, I'm still the head. Hi, mark that down. Thanks. So you have that happen every so often, but now I think it's a good thing because men are realizing that this is a more common thing, and they're also getting to the point where they don't want to assume that I am the assistant just because. So you have the other excuses like, "Oh, the other guy said that," and it's like, dude, you could just say, "My bad, moving on, we're fine." But it's gotten much better, and there are far more of us, which is absolutely delightful.
Much strength in numbers. I'd say the other thing too is that you could just lead with respect, lead with understanding. I remember all 6 of those tour performances. At the first one, I was thrown onto this tour that I didn't know. I didn't know what I was doing, and we got to our last stop, which was Jackson, Mississippi. It was a union house, and at the beginning of the day, they would mostly go to my male A1, and as soon as and he'd be like, "Talk to her. She's gonna walk you through the back line," and then they'd be like. And the other thing is, it's being young. Being young and a woman is kind of like 2 strikes. But by the end of the day, they were like, she has lists. She clearly knows the show. And they just start coming back, "What next, ma'am? What next, ma'am? What next, ma'am?" And, you just win them over. And that local actually had a woman steward. So progress.
Yeah, progress, absolutely, and a lot more work to be done still. Uh, from Facebook, we have a question. How do you like to train sub mixers versus how do you like to be trained on a mix? Julie's got this.
Um, I just want to take a minute to plug the miracle that is Maddie recording, which was it so beats the crap out of throwing quarters on a table with a Walkman on, which is how we used to do it. But we have the ability now to take an SD7, for example, record the show in Maddie, um, and then take it into a studio on an SD7 and play it back. And because of the way the recording is set up, you're recording pre-fader on every channel. So you're basically just getting it right off of your socket on your rack. And so when you are training in a studio situation, playing back this Maddie recording, you hear it when you screw it up. You bring up the mic of the guy that's in the bathroom, you hear that, and you get to work out all these mistakes in the studio in front of a non-paying audience. I mean, I'm sorry, not in front of a paying audience. And it's just miraculous. But the chances that we have to do that are few and far between. You basically have to be on a show that has the budget for it and is willing to, pay for the studio space and to go in there and do all that. But man, it's miraculous. Sorry, got on my soapbox again. It's great.
I love it. I wanna try it. All I've gotten so far, the closest I've gotten to that is I've got my, vocals in one ear, band in the other ear, stereo recording of the show. And luckily when I was training on Rock of Ages, I was loading in another show that had a Digico. So, and this is, you must ask, I went up to the A1 and I said, hey, can I throw on your faders over lunch? Like obviously I won't change scenes or anything. Can I just throw on your faders? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So on the lunch break, I would be throwing Rock of Ages just on a set of Digico faders. And then at one point we got back and Nevin Steinberg, who's a Broadway designer, came and was like, oh, we're mixing. What are we mixing? And I was like, don't look at me. It's Rock of Ages. I have to do number 9 tonight. It's really hard. So just practice. Anytime you can practice. I guess I've kind of already talked a lot about both training, I guess less about training a sub, which is just to say, give them all the information you can, ask them what they need. In Dan's case, who we talked about before, I phased him in pretty quickly, but then I was going to be away for 7 shows. So we like had really agreed on what our schedule was going to be. He was like, I would like, to do 2 full shows, then I'd like a night off. And then maybe you want to do your last show, just so I can, breathe and watch you one more time. And I said, great, that absolutely works for me. You can have as many as you want or as few as you want. If someone's newer at mixing, you might really have to figure out what they need, because in my regular A2, Matt's case, he didn't have as much mixing experience. So I sort of had to devise a training schedule and figure out, okay, like I've got to start him out on some book scenes, and then I've just got to get him comfortable doing this for longer stretches of time. So rather than have him do, all the easy scenes, it's much more Matt needs to do 15 straight minutes, then he needs to do 20 straight minutes. So basically with Matt, we built the show from the middle until all I was doing was the opening and the closing. And then I handed those over too. But with Dan, it was more, let's jump in and out, because we both had done a lot more mixing and we were more comfortable doing handoffs like that without things getting messy. Because you definitely want to pick good moments if you're trading back and forth. Make sure you've got some buffer, because one time we messed it up and stage management's like flaking the lid. I'm like, we had a bad handoff. Sorry, I got to mix.
Yeah, I would 100% say the ideal way to learn how to mix is off of Maddie recording. I have never had that pleasure, but 100% if I ever get that chance, that is the best way to go. I have had the chance to do that to train some people with a Maddie recording, and it makes it so much easier because you can sit there in real time and say, okay, this is a really hard scene. You need to pay attention to X, Y, and Z, and we're going to go back and do this a couple times so you can get it. There's a couple different ways you can learn a show, a couple different philosophies. You can do what Becca was talking about, where you go and say, okay, we're going to do the easy stuff first. We're going to do the solo, then we're going to do a duet. We're going to build on this as we go. And then, so basically you're mixing small chunks of the show live in front of the audience, and then you just start mixing a little bit more and a little bit more every single night. The other ways are you can start from the beginning and then work through your way through the show sequentially and do, okay, you're going to do the first 10 minutes, then the first 15 minutes. And I've never actually done this way, so I can't say how well it works, but the other way is to start from the end and say, okay, you're going to do the last 10 minutes. Okay, you're going to do the last 15 minutes. So at that point, what you're always doing the new stuff first when you're fresh and aren't quite as panicked about what's coming up. So, and you're getting to the more familiar things as you go along. However, the advantage of starting from the beginning and working through sequentially is that I've had some people like Dan and one of my other A2s, Mark, that one, where if they feel comfortable with a scene that's coming up next, they can just continue on. And that was actually something I did on Mean Girls when I was learning the show on Broadway. Was Shu, who was the mixer, was very nice about being like, okay, cool, like we're gonna start here, and then we kind of figure out a plan of, okay, I want to go to here, and we got to a certain point. I was like, I think I can keep going, so started going, and then I was like, there is not a good place to stop in this scene for another 10 minutes. Oh crap! So you hit those points, and you're like, well, we're doing the next 10 minutes now. That's just what's gonna happen. So you kind of have to pay attention to whoever you're training, what they're comfortable with, and also if you have those people who they can just go for it. But also, so the mix video that I put is from Miss Saigon, and the 2 toughest scenes to mix are the very beginning. The way the associate told me was, they're named very appropriately. At the beginning is the heat is on, and it is on. You jump right into full pressure for the first 15 minutes, and it does not stop. And then the second act, which is where that video is from, is the nightmare. And it is a nightmare. There are 3,000 things going on at the same time. You are hitting cues, you are hitting pickups. It is all very quick, and it is terrifying. And so when Dan was learning how to mix that show, we structured it so he started on the easier stuff first, and we saved those last two for when we did a full run through in rehearsal when we were putting in new actors. So that was you get a trial run on this first, and then we can go. So some things like that you can structure and be like, okay, we're going to have this opportunity. We're going to plan so that you don't get thrown to the sharks right away.
I'm so glad you mentioned put-in rehearsals. For those who don't know what a put-in is when you are either putting a new actor into the show or an understudy is going to get a full costume, full tech run without an audience. Fantastic training grounds. If you know one's coming up, see if your sub's available, or see if they want to have the A2 mix it, because it's a lot less pressure. Typically, you're really only focusing on if you have a new person that you're EQing, you can make a couple more mistakes. It's pretty casual. A lot of the actors are not doing their choreography full out. You might, say you're putting in someone for the lead, they might be the only person in full costume, full everything, but you're still in microphones because you need to be microphones. And in the case of Rock of Ages, because of what the show is, we have a full band for our put-ins. So it actually really is a great experience to really understand the sound of the show. Usually you might just have a piano or maybe piano and drums, but at least you can work on the pickups. It's a really, really great environment.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Becca. I would add to that actually, in the regional theater setting or educational theater, or conservatory, things like that, understudy rehearsals. Sometimes, the full cast will be replaced by every understudy, and that's a really also casual, graceful place to be able to practice mixing with where maybe a few mistakes are acceptable at that time. Okay, a couple more questions and then I think we're on our way. This one's in many parts. This is a scenario that's coming up, so bear with me while I get through this. So this person writes, they're taking on a role this summer, I would like to know where, of the role of sound designer and engineer for a small professional theater company. That's doing The Sound of Music and You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown in rotating rep. It's outdoors in a saddle span tent, and this person is responsible for reinstalling the sound system to accommodate audience social distancing, as well as all the sound design and engineering for the cast and band. They have experience in school and community theater, but their background is as a freelance sound engineer for musicians. What tools, both physical and mental, do you recommend? What are common trip ups? What outdoor experiences should they be made aware of? Any Sound of Music specific tips, COVID safety protocol, etc. Anyone want to hit on any of those things, Julie?
Well, remember that Sound of Music is basically a reprise and a reprise, so it'll be the easiest of the two to do. All kidding aside, the thing that I would draw your attention to the most is the placement of the speakers versus where the performance space is, because I don't know what exactly you're looking at in the tent situation and where the audience is going to need to be. But if you don't have a lot of experience with lavalier mics, which is, I'm assuming that's what you're going to be using, it can get real dicey if you have you have to be very clear about where your spill from your speakers is hitting your stage. You've got to get super clear on it, because the high end is dramatically different than on any kind of a handheld microphone. And that is going to cause you the biggest game before feedback problems. So get that part of it right when you're deciding where to put things.
That's great. Heather, do you have something to add to that?
I think Becca has ideas. I'm still thinking, so 100%. Okay. You go.
I had one tiny idea, which is especially given that we still might be social distancing and limiting people. Make friends with that child wrangler on Sound of Music. make sure that they are able to explain to the children how they need to treat the microphones, especially if they're going to be expected to not do it themselves, but maybe there's not an A2, maybe you're trying to minimize contact, make sure that that person is one of your first allies. And I don't do a lot of sound design, so I'm not going to speak to the how to make the tent sound good part. I like mixing.
I would say if you're doing two shows in rep, obviously the system's going to be fairly similar between the two shows, but if you have to load in and load out whatever's different between the two shows, try to minimize that as much as possible. On the flip side, avoid stage moms. Just in general, they're a little bit nuts. Um, but yeah, I would say try if you can eliminate as many variables as possible. If the audience is always in the same place for both shows where they're social distancing, try to figure out if that's going to change and if that does, what you need to do from show to show. But try to make as much of it automated as possible, that you don't have to take down major components of the system from one show to another. And you have, honestly, probably for COVID, you'll have to have some cleaning procedures in places for the microphones, as well as the transmitters that are on people and things like that. So I would say be very clear about what safety standards you need for COVID and what they're expecting for the equipment that you're doing, and make sure that that is a conversation, especially because little kids, though adorable, can be gross. So I've had ones that have dropped, well, I've also had adult actors who have dropped microphones into toilets and things like that, but it's far more likely when you have a child. So enjoy that aspect of it. But yeah, make friends with the child wrangler. They can be invaluable in helping, and especially with the kids, make it as easy as possible. On Billy Elliot, we had all the kids on halos just because it was so much easier to say, okay, you're gonna pull it down and make a necklace, then you're gonna pop it up and make a headband so it goes underneath all your hair, and just very simple concepts. And most child actors are surprisingly mature, so you can actually enjoy that part of it.
That's, yeah, great advice from everybody. And you know, just remember that you are a person and your safety is also required and important, and advocate for yourself. Don't put yourself into a dangerous situation in the middle of a pandemic, you know, for the good of the show or something like that. You got to really keep yourself safe in this situation. So, kudos and congratulations on landing a summer contract. I hope it plays out for you, and I hope you stay safe.
Also, don't compromise your safety when there's not a pandemic.
Right. Never compromise your safety, and especially not now. One more question. What do you think the future holds for this industry in the COVID-19 and post-COVID era?
Um, I think that out of all of the aspects of entertainment, and we're obviously speaking specifically about live entertainment here, um, I think Broadway is going to be the last to come back. The road's going to open before Broadway does. And clearly, as we heard from, I believe it was Maria who asked the last question about doing the gig this summer, clearly that's happening someplace else. I know that we did have an outdoor performance of something here in New Jersey, a community theater kind of thing. They did something over the summer. But I think that truly, I think that Broadway proper is looking at a 5-year recovery period, because I don't know that people understand the economic impact it's had on the city, and we are 100% dependent on international tourism for our industry to be viable. And people keep talking about, well, I don't know why you can't just open up and do social distancing and blah, blah, blah. And like, first of all, the backstage logistics are unreal, not possible. Like we have in the finale for our Tina Turner coming off, she exits, she's got a 12-second quick change in which she changes tights, changes her dress, changes her wig, changes her lipstick, changes her microphone. And there are 8 people around her making this happen. And then she's up the steps and making her entrance. And that's the kind of stuff you have happening everywhere. So that part of it's not viable, the logistics. But the for-profit theater business model can't be done socially distant. I mean, they have published in like Playbill Online, they published the Broadway grosses. It's one of the things that you start to pay attention to when your seating becomes light. And you can look and see how much money the shows made, what their seating capacity is, what percentage they were at, what the average ticket price was. When you get down under 70%, you need to start looking for another job. So you're talking about trying to seat an audience in a socially distant fashion, and you're already automatically going to be operating at a loss. The show is, the producers are. So there's that challenge that needs to be overcome. And I feel very strongly that as the economic recovery is happening, because it will happen, it absolutely will happen. I think it's just going to take a long time to get people back into the city and get the shows back to where they can be running at full capacity. But I think that a lot of other things about our industry are going to change. I think there are things that need to be changing. Things regarding diversity and the way that we treat people and the types of other types of people that we can get involved in the business that may not have the opportunities to right now. You know, where's our outreach going? All of that kind of stuff. And I got on my soapbox again. I'm so sorry, but I've had a lot of time to think about this because I haven't thrown a fader since March. So
I
that's
love your soapbox. Take me with you. Yeah, I would echo everything Julie said. Like she explained so eloquently, you know, the Broadway business model is built, your operating costs are budgeted around the assumption that you can sell every seat. So every show that is open right now was budgeted with that assumption. So if those shows are going to come back, they need to be able to sell every seat. It's really that simple. You know, we're not going to re-choreograph existing shows to accommodate social distancing. We're not going to do Rock of Ages until that actor can be picked up and thrown in the air and then make out with that other actor. It's just not going to happen. So I share the same hopes and dreams. You know, I want people to believe in our industry. I know that a lot of people aren't going to have the money to spend on our industry. You know, Broadway tickets are prohibitively expensive, and that's one of the things I really think needs to change. You know, I think that if you're in a community, you need the public school students of your community to be subsidized to see your shows, to know about theater, not just to meet the actors, but to meet us, to know that our careers are out there. You can get a good paying job doing what we do and have a lot of fun. So yeah, if you haven't read the demands of a group called We See You White American Theater, I highly suggest that you take a perusal, see all the things that unfortunately have been really wrong with our industry for a long time, that begin with representation and go as far as people feeling genuinely unheard and unsafe. And that's something that as a white woman, I have not acknowledged enough and plan to do better on in the future.
Yeah, I think in general the entire theater community has an opportunity to do a full restart. And I know with Mean Girls, we're expecting to head back sometime in the fall. We don't know when. We're hoping for the end of July, but that depends on a lot of other factors. But we've had conversations about discrimination and racism and things like that, and just within our own company to say, what can we do to make this better? What do we need to fix? What can we do to make our environment more welcoming and more functional for everyone? So I think having a pause has been a good thing in that respect, because sometimes that's the only thing you can talk about, because we can have the same conversation about when we're coming back, all of that stuff, and that just goes in a loop after a while. But with people who are wanting to still stay engaged in theater and still do things, talking about what theater looks like when we get back is a good opportunity to both scratch that itch of I want to feel connected to my profession again, but also to say we can step forward in a good way and actually have an opportunity to enact some meaningful change. What logistically I think will happen is at least with touring, there's going to be a lot more safety practices put into place, which will hopefully be somewhat standardized across. At least you have like Broadway Across America, who takes care of a lot of contracts and scheduling. So they might have a process for keeping things clean, keeping things safe, and doing those quick changes where you have 8 dressers and an actor all in 3 square feet of space trying to put things together and say, okay, how do we do this without infecting everyone. But at the same time for touring, because on Broadway you have swings, you have subs, but on touring you don't necessarily have that. You have the contingency of people that you are touring with. So some shows have a swing tech, which is someone who at least covers one job in each department. So if I got sick, my A2 could move up and mix, and then the swing tech would take over the A2 position for the show or whatever I needed while I was sick. But not every show has that, so I think that will hopefully become a more common thing. Because I had an actor ask, "Oh, so like, what happens if one of you gets sick?" And well, the person who's the least sick goes out front and mixes, or the person who's not sick goes out front and mixes. If we're both sick, the person who's least sick goes out front and mixes, and you just hope they don't have to bring a trash can with them. So you have those things that I think will be bigger issues of saying, okay, how do we actually allow people to have their sick days without it becoming a crisis? And a good thing for touring is that there are so many shows that venues are trying to schedule that I'm guessing once we actually come back and can start touring, every show is going to be booked for at least another couple years out. So that'll be good job security for the people on tour when that actually happens. We're just waiting to see when that actually happens. So that'll be a good thing because I think everyone is ready for theater to come back, to watch it, to do it, to just be a part of it.
So when Heather comes to your town, go see her. Go support your local economy because, like we've said, we suspect that will come first. And part of that is that they can operate on different profit margins. They don't have to sell out the 3,000 seat Fox to make money. The way Julie does need to sell out or come close to selling out the Lunt Fontaine on 46th Street for her show to turn a profit. So, and your local audience, if your city has a low case rate, I hope you'll feel safe going to the theater. I hope that a tour will feel safe stopping in your town.
Absolutely. I hope that too. And, I would just add that I think that once we all do get back into the swing of theater, we're going to be surprised at how much we learned from the pandemic and from our downtime, just from conversations like this too, with other people in our industry, which, I frankly never really did a thing like this when I was just working 1,000 hours a day. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And with that, I want to thank all of you, the attendees that have been here, sticking it out with us, asking all of our panelists some hard questions. And I want to thank you all, the panelists. Really honored to be sitting virtually next to you. You've offered some really super smart perspectives on a lot of different things, and I'm glad to know all of you now. And thank you, Sound Girls, for putting this together. Before you leave, scroll that chat for a bunch of resources that got dropped, all kinds of really cool videos to watch and things like that. So thanks again, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Elizabeth, the feeling is mutual. Oh, she left. Bye. This was great. You too.